Welcome to another fine episode of Pixel Talk, the show where we discuss what it means to be human from a pixel's point of view. And now, here is your host, Fivezy.
Vestiges of an ancient society, old housing sites, temple platforms, graves, and even mysterious paths leading directly down into the ocean floor. Who lived here and for how long is hard to say. Researching the Malden ruins is a task in and of itself because of just how remote the island is. So all we have are glimpses into a once thriving culture, a collapsed society. The collapse of society is an idea that's endured for thousands of years, from the Great Flood of the Bible washing away the sins of society to the lost city of Atlantis. Humans love thinking about collapse. But collapse isn't just an idea. This is a video about the very real dangers of society collapsing in the near future. It's a really heavy topic, and it's not something we can talk about without some major warnings up front. Because societal collapse is seductive, whether it's the apocalypticism of a cult leader or the traditionalist backlash against change. You can be sure that when someone talks about the impending collapse of society, they're not just trying to sell you on an idea, but recruit you to a cause. Because if you believe you're in the end of times, then you have no alternative but to be a dedicated evangelist. This means that a lot of us, most of us really, are going to have a healthy skepticism of anything that promises to prove that collapse is coming. As we should. But this doesn't mean societal collapse is impossible. I mean, every empire in history has collapsed, and while we've evolved a lot as a species, I think just assuming we're past the possibility of collapse is equally as dangerous as drinking the Kool-Aid in the other direction. So, dear viewer, I hope you have your guard up. I hope you think critically about everything here in this video. specifically focused on wealth distribution, but before they could get to that, they believed they needed a way to quantify the world's resources. And as luck would have it, halfway across the world in Cambridge, MIT professor J. Wright Forrester was researching ways of simulating complex systems like the economy using the newest breakthrough in tech, the digital computer. At a conference that same year, Forrester ended up meeting Aurelio Peccei of the Club of Rome. And after hitting it off, they embarked on the gargantuan task of using Forrester's work, which he was now calling system dynamics, to model the whole world's economy and ecosystem and use that model to predict where humanity was heading. But predicting the future is hard, really hard. In the year 1900, the Boston Globe predicted the 2000s would have cities with moving sidewalks, tube transportation systems, and personal flying vehicles. And while it's easy to laugh at how optimistic these old predictions are, you can't fault 20th century thinkers for imagining the 2000s would be better than they were. The 1900s were filled with never-before-seen progress. People in the United States started the century living in farms with one change of clothes, and halfway through they were driving cars, talking on the phone, and watching TV. The 1900s have arguably been the most influential 100 years out of the entirety of humanity's existence. So, yeah, by the end, some people were a little optimistic. But even if they weren't so optimistic, systems like the economy by looking at 6 key variables: population, food production, industrialization, pollution, and the consumption of non-renewable natural resources. Make sure you remember that last one. They ran 12 computer simulations to map out how the world would change in the 21st century, and in 1972, they released their findings as a book, The Limits to Growth, a 200-page manuscript outlining their grim conclusions. This is what they found. If the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. The most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. It is possible to alter these growth trends and to establish a condition of ecological and economic stability that is sustainable far into the future. The state of global equilibrium could be designed so that the basic material needs of each person on Earth are satisfied, and each person has an equal opportunity to realize his individual human potential. If the world's people decide to strive for this second outcome rather than the first, the sooner they begin working to attain it, the greater will be their chances of success. The most severe simulation, the so-called standard run, is a hypothetical future where humanity didn't take the findings seriously and continued living as normal. And this run
Comparison as Mashiach. Where was he born? I asked. Krakow, they said. Oh, Mashiach is born in Krakow, but Bethlehem, I hit back. They sent me back to my mother. So she barricades herself at the front door.
You wanna know how I get away with everything? I work. All the fucking time. From Monday to Friday. Friday to Sunday. I love it. I work. So when I say come on, I mean come on. You've got to work with me. Nah, I don't workers. I need real builders. Work it. Work to be a winner. Sweat.
The whole argument relied on one misplaced variable, non-renewable resources. The fear of running out of non-renewables like precious minerals and fossil fuels is one that comes up every now and again. If we're on a finite planet and minerals are a non-renewable resource, it's a matter of when they'll run out, not if. But some economists argue that there's no such thing. Once you exhaust the resources that are abundant and cheap to extract from the surface, society will naturally transition into moving deeper and deeper into the earth to extract the ones that are harder to get. Copper is used in all of our electronics, and while we may eventually run out of the easy-to-mine copper, there's an exponentially larger amount of it deep below the surface. Only that it's more expensive to get to and make useful. But with the right technology, even just trace amounts of copper can be made useful. And opponents of the LTG argue that when it comes down to it, the economy will dedicate the technology and resources to make it so. Resource creation is the idea that you don't run out of resources, you run into them. It's been popularized by the extraction industry.
So now I need to explain one last thing to you. When I say work, I mean you've got to work for yourself. Love yourself. Feed yourself. So you can be a winner. All together. Work to be a winner. Winners, work it good. Sweat to be a winner.
What have you talked about? Is it money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth?
Part 1. The uninhabitable. It feels really hard to talk about the future. We all know climate change is getting worse at a terrifying pace. And I think to a lot of people, it doesn't even feel worthwhile looking into the problem in any detail because we all feel incredibly helpless in the face of what really looks like it could be the end of the world. And then you go look into the problem more, and that doesn't help. In fact, the details and data about just how badly pollution has fucked up the planet lead you to the inevitable conclusion this is a problem beyond voting or protest. This is a problem we just don't have the time to solve with incremental reforms or market solutions. The opening page of the Unabomber article as well describes this pretty perfectly.
It is worse, much worse than we think. The slowness of climate change is a fairy tale, perhaps as pernicious as the one that says it isn't happening at all, and comes to us bundled with several others in an anthology of comforting delusions. That global warming is an Arctic saga unfolding remotely, that it is strictly a matter of sea level and coastlines, not an enveloping crisis sparing no place and leaving no life undeformed, that it is a crisis of the natural world, not the human one, that those two are distinct, and that we live today somehow outside or beyond, or at the very least defended against nature, not inescapably within and literally overwhelmed by it. That wealth can be a shield against the ravages of warming, but the burning of fossil fuels is the price of continued economic growth, and growth and the technology it produces will inevitably engineer a way out of environmental disaster.
The
last few years have seen great advances in terms of environmental thought and anarchical sentiment. The increasingly apparent impact of industrial society on the climate, as well as the elitist and incompetent process of liberal democracy, has left many in a state of despair, frustration, and rage. The solutions, either too drastic or too naive, rarely catch on. What are we to do as we face a world of increasing hopelessness? For one man, the answer was clear. Send bombs through the mail from your cabin in Montana. This is the philosophy of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. This video is sponsored by Sophie. I've always agreed that the internet should be safe and secure for everyone, and Surfshark is one of the few options out there that makes this a reality. Get Surfshark VPN by entering the promo code SYSTEMUS for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Click on the link in the description below. Ted was born on May 22nd, 1942 in Chicago. Born to loving parents, he was nonetheless separated from them for a short period due to a hives outbreak. After his isolation in the hospital, Ted would show little emotion. However, he would also express extreme sympathy for animals who were caged. In high school, Ted demonstrated a profound intellect, especially in the area of mathematics. As one classmate remembers, he was never really seen as a person, as an individual personality. He was always regarded as a walking brain, so to speak. This would eventually lead him to Harvard at the age of 16, where he earned a degree in mathematics and finished with a GPA of 3.12. However, at the same time, Ted was constructing a specific worldview that had become increasingly anti-technology. To put his philosophy to the test, he signed up for a series of psychology studies done on Harvard undergrads. Conducted by the psychologist Henry Murray, these studies were used to research the effects of stress on human belief and generally used interrogation techniques that would appear unethical by today's standards. Subjects were told that they would debate personal philosophy and would submit essays on beliefs and values. Then individuals acting as other students would come in and verbally abuse the subject, telling them that their ideas were ridiculous and illogical. Some have suggested that these studies were part of the CIA's MKUltra project. Nevertheless, and despite the possible abuse Ted suffered while at Harvard, he argues that the experiences there had no significant effect on the course of his life. After Harvard, Ted enrolled in the University of Michigan, where he specialized in geometric function theory. Unfortunately, this subfield was becoming increasingly less popular during the 60s. Ted then became the youngest assistant professor in the history of Berkeley. Still, his passion for mathematics as a career was waning, as evident by students' reports that Ted was a terrible professor who would never answer questions and simply teach straight from the textbook. Ted would resign in 1969. While he was teaching, Ted had his first documented desire for violence. He began to experience intense sexual fantasies that involved him becoming a female. At one point in 1966, he decided to undergo gender transition. However, while in the waiting room, Ted decided against it and wrote in his journal that he had a deep passion to kill the psychiatrist and everyone else that hates him. Feelings of inadequacy and loneliness appeared to confound at this stage of his life, resulting in a burning hatred for society itself. Ted built a remote cabin outside of Lincoln, Montana, while receiving money from his parents. His initial goal was to become completely self-reliant, and he spent much of his time studying wilderness survival. However, after discovering that a road had been built in an area of the forest he considered sacred, Ted changed his goal to dismantling industrial society. From 1978 to 1995, Ted would go on to kill 3 people and injure 23 others through mailing a series of bombs. The bombs generally targeted those who he had felt aided the progress of industrial society, such as those who work in the timber industry, genetics, oil, or computer science. The idealism of his actions climaxed when he sent several letters to prominent newspapers, giving them the ultimatum to either publish his manifesto or face further bombings. The newspapers obliged, publishing a more than 30,000-word piece that discusses the evils of technology, the complacency of leftism, and the potential for a new future. Fortunately, the idiosyncratic writing led to his sister-in-law and brother identifying the author as Ted. This led to his eventual capture and sentencing, where he is currently serving 8 life sentences. One of Ted's primary influences is that of the Christian anarchist philosopher Jacques Ellul. The main theme in Ellul's work is the idea that modern technology directly threatens human freedom and religion. Ellul believed that movements that have fueled industrial society, such as materialism, scientism, and economics, are simply substitutes or false idols for God. He argues that these ideologies tend to use and abuse their followers in order to continue the necessity of efficiency. This is identified through Ellul's use of the word technique, which he defines as the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency for a given stage of development in every field of human activity. Efficiency becomes the unquestionable goal of human existence and, by default, subordinates the natural world. Ellul's major concern is the capacity for this technique to shape the social and psychological makeup of individuals. Firstly, it makes us adapt to technology rather than it adapting to us. Secondly, it shapes our desires around efficiency through a constant need for utility and categorization. This is aided by media and propaganda, which is manipulated by special interest groups and creates an inner control over the individual by a social force, which means that it deprives him of himself. Unlike Ted, however, Ellul does not promote violence as an answer. As he argues, a Christian who chooses violence is sacrificing freedom for necessity. In fact, his definition of anarchy is an absolute rejection of violence, as he sees the nation state to be the primary source of it.
About it, the energy cost of extraction is inversely proportional to concentration. So extracting minerals from an ore that contains half of the concentration requires twice as much energy. If we had to move on to mining lower and lower grade ores, the energy cost would rise to astronomical heights, many times over what the whole world produces in a year. Once you run out of the high-grade stuff, it's just not something humans have the capacity of doing, even with sci-fi level tech. But it's precisely that level of tech arriving sometime in the near future that the optimistic skeptics are counting on. According to them, a model like Limits to Growth just cannot predict revolutions in the world of technology. A caveman could never make an accurate model of the future because they could never account for a technological breakthrough like agriculture. So how can we predict the future when we don't know what will revolutionize our world? Years prior to the Limits to Growth, 2 economists separately took on the effort of predicting the future, and they both came to the conclusion that technological progress grows exponentially with time. And if this exponential technological growth is added to the LTG models, then the findings completely change. Human society can basically grow. prediction that buried the book for decades. Brazen, impudent, a piece of nonsense. The essential story of the LTG is one of hard science arrogance, a piece of irresponsible nonsense. This selection of responses was some of the more mild critiques. The Club of Rome was accused by otherwise reputable people of trying to enslave the world and install a global dictatorship. The people behind the study were slandered as being both maniacal evil scientists and ignorant idiots who had no idea what they were talking about. But this pales in comparison to the most enduring critique of the theory that came from libertarian Ronald Bailey, who in his review of the book wrote, "Limits to Growth predicted that the world would run out of gold by 1981, mercury by 1985, and natural gas by 1993. We obviously haven't run out of any of those, which would be a pretty damning indictment of the book, but these predictions can't be found anywhere in the LTG. So where did Bailey get those numbers from? In short, he lied. Early in the book, the researchers used those predictions hypothetically. They're placeholder numbers the authors use so they can demonstrate a point before moving on to the actual model. But Ronald Bailey cherry-picked the passage and created the most enduring lie about the limits to growth. A lie that reached not just popular culture, but one that's been included in economic research from institutions like Harvard to dismiss the LTG outright. For the rest of the century, the limits to growth was known as that study that predicted that we'd run out of everything by the 90s. And part of this might have been inevitable. The 1900s were an optimistic century. Anyone who had bad news about the future was likely to be a black sheep. But the reaction to the LTG might have been a little less than authentic. When Rachel Carson released...
This isn't an informal relationship either. In August 1971, in a deeply jokified move, Richard Nixon depegged the value of the dollar from gold and pegged it to oil instead. This was a response to the enormous debts that America was generating due to, among other things, the Vietnam War. As a result, oil is always traded in US dollars, sometimes referred to as petrodollars. Of course.
Some, such as Cynthia Ozick, likened Kaczynski to Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov, a philosophical criminal of exceptional intelligence and humanitarian purpose, driven to commit murder out of an uncompromising idealism. Others suggest that the Unabomber was consumed by the outdated notion of the noble savage, the idea that we can somehow return to the life of the frontierman and enjoy an idyllic natural existence while ignoring the downsides to such a life. Specific critiques have also been launched against the manifesto. Kaczynski entirely avoids discussing the seemingly innocent positives of technology such as reading glasses, music recordings, and sewers that appear to improve human existence and give some quality to life. Likewise, his argument that modern man has no ability to control pollution and other things outside of his control doesn't really hold up in comparison to the primitive man, who would likewise have many things outside of his control, such as disease and basic security. Ted counters this by stating that the primitive man can handle these issues stoically, but it is not entirely clear as to why the modern man can't also accept problems out of their control stoically. It appears that Ted has an absolutist and perfectionist position here, in which anything considered technological is evil and everything natural is good. Likewise, Ted believes that a coordinated universal shutdown of progress is the only solution. However, this seems incredibly idealistic, especially in contrast to his pessimistic view of humanity. If one country decides to continue progressing in technology, they could quickly dominate the world. Ted appears unwilling to accept the possibility that technological progress is a Pandora's box we simply cannot close. Finally, if Ted truly values autonomy and the freedom of choice, then modern society still allowed him to quit a comfortable academic position and live in the woods. Where industrial society allows varying lifestyles of comfort and freedom, a pre-industrial state may fail to offer a life of security if desired. Perhaps the greatest critique, however, is found in the work of Jacques Ellul, one of Ted's greatest influences. Ted felt it absolutely necessary to kill for the efficiency of his message, but Elul denounces violence in pursuit of the truth, as doing so simply falls into the same heartless utility that Ted had rejected so fervently. Kaczynski's sadistic and sociopathic disregard for the lives of innocent people should make anyone wary of his idealism. Despite his coherent and prophetic critique of late-stage capitalism, we should not mistaken his personal anger towards the system, which evidently destroyed his soul through isolation and experimentation, as worthy philosophical discourse.
Thanks for watching. Pixel Talk will return.
Visit tigler.com for more art, apparel, and things yet to be revealed.